Yeah, we're live. Okay. Hey, everyone. So, this is the Canadian Libertarian, and today I'm going to be having a conversation with a gentleman that goes by the name of Peter Remedios, and he's another concerned Canadian. I believe he's from the Toronto area. That he wants to discuss and talk about a lot of the issues that I like to discuss and talk about. And in particular, I'll just give you a quick rundown on them here now. Things such as taxation, growth in government, civil liberties, immigration, corporate welfare, cronyism, and climate change. So these are obviously topics and issues that I would imagine has a profound effect on all Canadians, and a lot of Canadians want to hear people's perspectives and opinions regarding these particular issues. That's a counter narrative or a counterweight to what you're constantly being heard from those who are part of the established media of this country. Because I find that, and you're probably aware of this, anyone that watches my videos, I find that you're actually being woefully or ill informed by those who actually represent those in the established media, because they seem to go about it from an ideological perspective rather than anything that's nuanced or is looking to actually converse with people's varying opinions. It seems they just want to jam a particular ideology down your throat without having many people's different perspectives. And that's not what I want to do. As you know, I like to hear people's varying opinions and perspectives. And as I've said many times in the past, I don't care about your race. I don't care about your sex. I don't care about your religion. I don't care about any of those superficial aspects of what it is to be a human being. I care about what's going on in here, right? And, well, I guess that ultimately here as well. But the battle of the ideas has to take place. But the only way that can happen is if you're not functioning in an echo chamber. And today, the established media predominantly, there are some outliers, there are some exceptions, but predominantly is a representation of an echo chamber. Me and Peter are going to try to break through some of that today, and hopefully we'll do a pretty decent job of it, and maybe you'll come out on the other side of this conversation much better informed as a result. So go ahead, Peter, just introduce yourself to the people, and you can start out whatever topic that you would like to deal with first.
Well, thanks for having me, Canadian Libertarian. Very happy to be here. Never done anything like this before, so this is the first time. But I'm happy to share my thoughts. Just in terms of my background, I'm from Toronto. I grew up here virtually my whole life. However, I am a first-generation immigrant. My family came here actually from Africa back in the 70s. And the reason I've gotten involved now with you and others, I'm actually as I mentioned to you, a member of the People's Party of Canada. And the reason I've decided to become politically involved, which I wasn't before, because I am a concerned Canadian. I'm concerned about the road that this country is taking. As I mentioned, we came here from Africa, so we know what it's like when you don't have your liberties and freedoms and rights. We came here because we wanted to embrace Western liberal values and ideals. And I just see that that's being eroded and taken away from us. And I see us that we need to reverse course, or we're going to pay the piper, so to speak, sooner rather than later.
Excellent. Yeah. And you know what? Like I say, I am totally in agreement with you. And actually, the beautiful thing, predominantly now, the American experience was kind of the central focus of when North America, I mean, we don't have to get into the colonizing and all that stuff, but as you suggested, it alluded to, was predominantly those who were a representation of post-Enlightenment era values, like you say, like Western liberalism or classical liberalism, as you would define it today. Because although I don't like to give anyone the ability to redefine terms, so I still call it liberalism. But like I say, it'd be for people who understand the classical liberal values, but they did predominantly come from post-Enlightenment era values that were in conjunction predominantly was about respecting the individual rather than placing the collective or the group, because historically that's where most authoritarian regimes, whether they were monarchs or dictators in the past, it was through the realm of collectivism. So it was post-Western ideas and values that predominantly created countries such as the US and Canada. Now, because we do have our colonial past in Canada, and we're still to this day kind of quasi-tied to the monarch, we don't seem to have that same disposition as far as the American psychology or their culture, as far as being completely autonomous, as far as not aligned with collective ideologies and representing a philosophy that's based on the individual. Because as we all understand, this, to me, I don't care which side of the political spectrum or which area of the political spectrum you come from, or even your ideological background, is if we don't come to the terms or come to the realization that we have to treat and perceive each other as individuals, then it's just back to tribalism, right? It's just back to pitting people into groups and fighting amongst each other. But as you recognize, and I even recognized early on, I'm someone that I grew up in. Well, I was born and raised partially in New Brunswick, but because a lot of the industry went down in the east coast of the country, my parents, like a lot of people, my parents were baby boomers, moved me to Ontario. Actually, where you're from, the east end of Toronto, a place called Scarborough, I'm sure you're aware of.
Yep.
And that was my first actual introduction into being in an area that had talk about diversity. I don't just mean, minor diversity. I mean, there was a place right next to me that were people that were actually from like Indian or Pakistan heritage. The people that were in the building that I lived predominantly, there was some mixture, but there were a lot of East Coasters, Newfoundlanders, Irish, Scottish, English, and then there was another community right next door in a different complex of townhouses. So you had a lot of Black people, Jamaicans, and stuff. But what we all recognized earlier on, which I think was the great thing, this is the beautiful thing about not having government or thought leaders telling you how you're supposed to perceive people or groups, is when you're raised in an atmosphere, which I was fortunately raised in, where I didn't have to perceive people based on their superficial identities. I thought of people as individuals. And what I recognized very early on is, doesn't matter if you don't walk into a situation with a chip on your shoulder or any preconceived notions or prejudice towards people. I got along great with everybody from many different variances and backgrounds. And that was the very first thing that started me on this road, which I guess has brought me to where I am today of adhering to the philosophy of liberty and individualism, is because it's the only thing that I can truly understand that is universalized, and it allows us all to deal with each other, whether it's in the social realm or the economic realm, without having any blinders or grievances just based solely on the fact that you might perceive the other person on the other side of the transaction or the interaction as having some kind of evil or nefarious ways or being people that you shouldn't respect. So to me, it always, once again, it comes down to the individual. And this is something why I'm concerned today and why I'm doing videos like I've been doing for the last few years, is because I've seen countries like, and you acknowledge, you moved to this country because you obviously respected and want to adhere to those kind of fundamental values and principles. But I'm sure you're recognizing today that we're not seeing that representative of the culture, or at least the dominant culture that propagates itself through the airwaves or the radio waves or through television or radio. Is now it seems that there are the ones that are our thought leaders or our political leaders want to pivot towards, like I say, it's something that should have been, we shouldn't be ever going towards that ever again, especially after the 20th century, into this identity politics or pitting people into groups.
Oh, it's absolutely one of my biggest pet peeves is identity politics, because I've seen it in the past. Like I said, I've seen it destroy other countries, tribalism, the division of people, instead of bringing them together based on common values and character. As you said, like when I meet people, I want to know who they are. I want to know them on an individual level, and I will get to know them as an individual. And I will, if I judge them at all, it'll be based on their character. It won't be based on, the group they belong to, whether, regardless of their race, their religion, their gender, their ethnic background. It doesn't matter to me. I mean, that's what we loved about Canada. Like the unifying force here was our values, and that we believed in, individual rights, the freedoms, the equality, the opportunity. That's why my family, particularly my parents, came here. Again, we were in Africa. We saw the writing on the wall and how things were deteriorating there, and the only opportunity for us was either go back to our homeland, which was India, which again, full of corruption and so on and so forth, and different identity politics and tribalism there, or to go to a Western country like Canada. And we were very fortunate to be accepted here, and that's what we cherish, those ideals, and that's what we embrace, and that's what we want to see continue here. And it's very troubling to me to see that being eroded. So that's why, again, I'm speaking out. I'm getting involved because you either, as it's been said, this country will go one of two ways. Either it'll become what we make it, or we allow it to become. And I want to help shape the country and reverse course and get it back to where it could potentially be. And that's what I'm here for.
Yes, and I'm very glad to know that there are many people that I'm seeing on a continued basis that share those same values. Because once again, doesn't matter to me whether you're a first generation Canadian or you've been here since the inception, or someone prior to even the inception of the concept of Canada, because we also got to take into account the First Nations or Aboriginal peoples as well. Is once again, this was another area that I actually, in New Brunswick, where I was born and raised, that was about the only area, because there weren't many people from they didn't look white like myself, other than predominantly people from First Nations communities. But once again, it was another area where you get a lot of information from, particular sources that might give you preconceived notions or prejudices towards people, or stereotyping. But once again, all it took for me, particularly, once again, this is my own anecdotal experience, I can't speak for anyone else, but all it ever took me my whole life is just to deal with a person individually, or even in a small group or small setting, to realize that no, that's all the things that you've been heard or you've been told by people that are predisposed to having prejudice, is the ability to break free of those. Because once again, if I maintain my mind to be restrained or constrained in the manner where I'm only perceiving people based on group or political identity, or even religious identity, then once again, I could be leaving out some areas in my life where there could have been a tremendous amount of benefit. And I noticed that for myself. Like I say, I've dealt with a lot of people from many different backgrounds that have been, to me, some of the best influences in my life. And to be honest with you, and once again, this isn't trying to, like I said, I don't even want to bring race too much into it. But when people talk about the race aspect of it, is what forms my opinion and why I should ever reject is because, to tell you the truth, most of the people in my life that have actually been oppressive towards me have shared my very exact same skin color. So once again, that was all the evidence I ever needed in my life, even when I was a kid and I didn't understand things philosophically or psychologically. That was all I really needed, was for evidence to show me that no, I don't want to look at people based on what other people say, that how I'm supposed to perceive them. I want to deal with people as individuals. And to me, I don't know many Canadians. I mean, people might, talk about group identity, but if you actually sit down and talk with them, I don't think you'd find too many Canadians that wouldn't actually agree almost wholeheartedly with what you and I are both saying today, is you have to treat each other as individuals. And it's the only way you can create a society where you actually can have genuine diversity, right? Because diversity doesn't, the way that the leftists talk about today, the only thing that matters as far as diversity is if you can put a mosaic of all different colors or religious symbolism. But in reality, it's not your colors, it's not the symbolism, it's what rests and resides between your ears and what you carry in your heart. So that's and really at the end of the day, as long as we're willing to follow some very finite and pretty minor rules in size and scope, just don't hit, don't steal, like just don't use preemptive force and violence and theft towards your other fellow man or woman or child. Those are ideals and philosophical principles that should be pretty easy to adhere to, because we learn these things usually when we're very just small children.
You would think so, but unfortunately that doesn't seem to be the case. And like I said, it really does come down to just being respectful of other people, right? I mean, it goes back to the old golden rule, treat others like you would want to be respected and treated. So, if we can just follow that, I think we'd all get along. Yes, we may disagree, we may have our differences, we may have our different worldviews and outlooks. That's fine, but let's have this conversation like we're having now and talk about it and maybe sharpen our own respective thinking and learn something. So, I mean, it's one of the concerns I have today is we're so partisan and we're so closed-minded that, how do you ever truly progress and grow if you don't get different perspectives? And we see different groups in different bubbles and they're just clashing, and they're not coming together to potentially be, greater than we are, what we are now. I mean, the potential is there. So let's talk, let's converse, let's interact. And and I think that's one of the concerns I have. I don't see that. And it doesn't help that our political leaders are in my view, doing more to divide us than to unify us. And that's just mind-boggling to me, quite frankly. When you have our prime minister talking about, different groups and trying to protect some or pander to some, and then others he's vilifying, it just doesn't make any sense to me. I mean, let's deal, like you said, we're individuals. Let's deal on an individual basis to tar and feather a whole group in any way. it's just, again, it just doesn't make sense to me, and it's not conducive to having a productive conversation.
Yeah, well, I think where it all starts, where it all usually begins predominantly, is because of our Western cultures, and like I say, based on that, the philosophy of post-Enlightenment era and those values and principles, is people understood historically, intrinsically, at least for multiple generations in the West, that most of our rights are inherent, God-given, or inalienable rights. If you're an atheist, you don't have to, perceive it as coming as God, as an arbitrator that's out of this world. You can just perceive it as an inalienable right. But they were based and entrenched upon negative or neutral rights. So just to be free from things, right? To be free from forced subjugation, slavery, coercion, theft, all those things. Those are universalities, and those are universals that, like I say, completely correlate with respecting individuals. And that will always play out, like I say, in a family setting, a community setting, or a societal setting. Those will usually play out fairly well. There's always going to be, of course, some fringes around the edges that's going to try to hamper that to benefit some way. But as long as your culture is built and based upon neutral or negative rights, those can be universalized. Where I seen the problem arise in, of course, this started, now I didn't perceive it myself as an individual because I wasn't alive at that time, but based on the information and anecdotal experiences that I've heard from many people from Canada, is when you started this rampant growth of what's called the redistributive state. So where now it's not just based on negative or neutral rights. Now it's, whether it's in the economic terms as far as redistributing wealth, or in the social realm as far as giving particular groups benefits over others, right? So affirmative actions and stuff. Now, to me, the proper correlation or the proper trajectory, if you go back through, like I say, the US or Canada, like as far as, respecting, the Black community and giving them the rights, or females and giving them the right to vote, is the proper trajectory would have been to keep that everything universalized, so that you're just bringing everyone into the table and not leaving anyone outside of the realm of that respective individual rights, freedoms, and liberty. But once again, now we're diverged. Now everybody, once you get past the point now where everybody's supposed to be treated equally as far as given equal opportunity under the law, well, now once again, this is where and we're getting into that later stage of democracy that seems to happen every couple hundred years, as people become, at some point in time, they get this sense of entitlement, and now it's just not enough to be treated equal as far as starting line, like starting gate, as if you're in the middle of a race or anywhere, that you're just lined up the same gate, and when the starter pistol goes off, everyone has the opportunity to advance from that point. But because everyone recognizes today that because government is, well, we all know it's a representation of monopoly of force or violence. Well, just like a real gun, you can use a real gun to defend people's freedoms, right? I can use a real gun to defend someone from harm from an external actor or a criminal, or someone has criminal intent. But that's also a representation of the state. You can use it for good purposes. So, like I say, to keep bad actors at bay and to arbitrate disputes, because you do need some form of a monopoly of violence for arbitration of disputes. But the problem is, once you've created this monopoly of violence, well, now you have to realize that there are people that are going to want to pick that up and use it for their own intents and purposes. And what we're seeing today are people that are wanting to use that as a means to create positive rights, where they can take from others without their express permission. Go ahead.
And just to pick up on that point, like I said, growing up, I don't know about your experience, but growing up, it was always the focus was on working hard, and you would have the opportunity here. It was about equality of opportunity, and that's all I and others really ever wanted, just to have that opportunity, work hard, be productive members of society, take care of our families, and so on and forth, and have that freedom. But more and more, as we've seen the encroachment of the government, of the state, into our personal lives. And as such, we've seen the erosion of our personal liberties and freedoms. And, particularly here in Ontario, it's become increasingly a nanny state, quite frankly. And what really seems to bother me is that the focus is no longer on the quality of opportunity, it's on the quality of outcome. And that is something I am completely against. I think if you have the opportunity, you rise or fall on your own, and you get those second and third chances, and that's great. But when you legislate or force outcomes, then again, where's our liberty? Where's the individual freedoms and rights that we have? And not only that, where are the incentives to do anything with our lives, quite frankly, right? So more and more I see that, and it's being pushed by our governments, by the mainstream media, and so on and so forth. And that's not the basis of what this country, in my view, was founded and how it can thrive and prosper going forward. If you're trying to equalize everyone and everything, then again, there's no greatness to be had. There's no opportunity to progress, and there's no way forward, quite frankly, and there's no incentive to go forward. So that's again one of the concerns I have, is that I see that government has encroached far too far into our personal lives and with the regulations and laws and so forth. And like you, I agree that there is a purpose for government, and it has its place. But over the years, over the decades, it's gone far. The pendulum has swung far too far, and we need to, like I said, retrench and get back to the proper role of government, which is not to be an actor or a player in the marketplace and in our lives, but to be, as you said, a place to regulate and arbitrate disputes and keep the peace and enact proper laws. But beyond that, I mean, it's their core function is completely out of whack as far as I'm concerned now.
Yeah, well, I mean, as you were alluding to when you were talking earlier, is, well, equality of opportunity, even though we recognize under any scenario where you have equality of opportunity, but whether that's in the state of nature or in our modern advanced societies, there are going to be winners or losers. But the beautiful thing about having that kind of freedom and a free market environment with genuine equality of opportunity is, like you said, you don't get your first, it's not just your first chance, right? Your first go at things. If you fail or succeed, you're given that opportunity to improve yourself under the just like if you were an Olympic medalist, a sprinter. You might not win that race, but as long as you're given the opportunity, to show if you put in the effort and you represent that you have any kind of merit, then you'll be given the opportunity to try that race all over again, and maybe you will succeed at some point in time. The problem that we're recognizing today is the fact that now you have any pretense of equality of outcome is to literally give certain people an added advantage, because you're picking winners or losers, socially or economically, the minute you try to create some equality of outcome. And I love using the sprint race is just a good visual thing for people to use. So imagine us all trying to finish the race all at the exact same time. The only way that could ever happen is if you're restricting or hampering or hindering the people that put in all that hard work and effort to become more proficient or more efficient in their sprint and capacities or capabilities. And to me, that's a terrible, destructive thing. And because I have children, and I would never want to raise them in an environment where I think that they should ever be restricted or hampered in any way, and not just them, but anyone else, I realize that it gives them a terrible, terrible mindset and a terrible psychology to think that somehow they should be restricted or encumbered in any way. I want everybody to have, like you say, the equality of opportunity. And just because you might not win the race today, or maybe you're not even second place, maybe you finish at the back of the field, that's okay, because with equal opportunity, you have the opportunity once again step up the plate and better yourself at some point in time going forward. But once you have gatekeepers that now have the capacity or the ability to pick winners or losers, there's not any actual structure that's probably going to incentivize people, other than, like I say, to play that victim card, or to play that I am the most oppressed, or you've probably heard people use the oppression Olympics. And to me, that, even when I hear people say that, it kind of disgusts me and devastates me to a degree, to when I hear someone that's perceiving themselves as some ultimate victim. I can't imagine how you would ever go through life, because I mean, I've gone through some really hard times. Let me just tell you, as someone that's come from a really poor, poverty-stricken background, and having an Irish background, and getting a lot of people that perceive the Irish in a certain way. Yeah, I went through some hell myself, but I would never want to place myself in a mindset where I constantly perceive myself as a victim forever, and use that, because I think that would have a terrible effect on my psychology and my self-esteem.
Absolutely. So as you were saying, like, why would you want to be thought of as a victim? That never made any sense to me. So even when, even this day, when folks, or I'm I'm told because of the color of my skin or whatnot that, you know, I've been oppressed or I'm a victim. It just doesn't resonate with me. It doesn't make any sense to me. Why would I want to think of myself as a victim? And quite frankly, you know, life has its hardships, has its tribulations, but that's what makes you stronger. That's how you build character. That's how you build resilience. And if you are protected from that, and I see that now, particularly with the younger generations, that they are coddled or protected, and then when they go out into the real world, you know, in the work world, and they see that, you know, it's not, you know, a bed of roses out there. You got to be tough. You got to be strong. You got to have that mental resilience and be able to handle any and all situations and roll with the punches. So again, society and the culture isn't doing people any service by having them think that they need to be protected, they need a hand up, they need to be coddled. That's not what builds strength of character, and that's not what's going to help you in life. It's just going to hinder you, and it's going to you're going to pay a price for it later on. And I've seen that in my own family, and you see that in a wider society, and just the way people are thinking these days, that, you know, in order to succeed, they need the help of the government, they need the help of others, they can't do it on their own. So again, it's just that victim mentality that's keeping them down.
Yeah. And actually it takes this, the thing about being a libertarian, being predominantly about the individual, but also the only thing, and some people might confuse this from libertarians if they don't understand the philosophy properly. It's not that I don't have a tremendous amount of respect for the group or the extended family or the tribe or whatever, however you want to perceive it. Right. But to me is acknowledging the individual, especially when you're talking about, and this is going to tie in with one of the areas that we were going to discuss anyways, is the growth in government. The more you place these powers of redistributing wealth in the hands of central planners, that actually they're not the ones that are doing it. They're not the benevolent. They're like I say, they're just redistributing other people's wealth to other people. But once again, how do you even show any form of appreciation or acknowledgement of who are actually benefiting people in society when it's done through such a like a state where there isn't no way that you can perceive who are the actual people that were truly benevolent and trying to help others? So, you know, in the past in Canada, I know when I was growing up, and actually it's funny because even in New Brunswick, where I'm originally from, even in 2019, it's so backwards in so many ways that it's kind of, I'm not happy in that way, but there's some backwards aspects of New Brunswick that I'm still very much appreciative of the fact that if I go back there today, and when I was living there for many years, if someone's home burns down, rather than looking to government or insurance, most of the people in the community, even to this day, will all come together, help buy the materials, and then you know exactly who it is that helped you, right? And then you get that automatic instinct that you want to reciprocate that. But once you've taken that out of the hands of individuals or people that are actors or groups in a particular community, once you've placed that so abstract that it's in some central planner's hand, then now you don't have the ability to keep those tight-knit communities formed where people actually respect each other properly, right? This is the problem with the rampant growth in government and that using that wealth redistribution state. Well, first, you don't even know who's actually benefiting. And actually what we're acknowledging today is a lot of that redistributive aspect of the state, as far as the quasi-socialist system, actually a lot of the major benefactors are those who are the deep state or the bureaucratic state. They're benefiting tremendously, and the people that are supposed to be the recipients. So let's just use welfare as an example.
Right.
In New Brunswick, where I'm from, welfare for, let's say, an individual or I believe it's 2 adults or whatever, might be $800 a month for 2 or $500 for 1. Meanwhile, the person that's the government employee that really all they're doing is, you know, filling out a couple forms, which we live in the age of information. Do you really need someone to sit and fill out a form when you have, like I say, you have blockchain technology, you have so many areas that you could do that, or automation or artificial intelligence, but yet these people are getting paid $70,000, $80,000 a year. So the people that are supposed to be the recipients of that redistributive efforts, and the whole reason why those redistributive efforts were even allowed to come to flourish or come to exist was because people thought, well, yes, we definitely need to help out the people that are truly poor and in desperate need of help in society. But in reality, those people aren't really getting helped out a whole lot. And I don't even think actually just handing them money is actually going to benefit them properly. But even if you just use the mathematical equation of it, it's actually those that are actually, just like I say, just the middleman, the bureaucrat, that's actually taking the biggest chunk of the pie.
Absolutely. And again, you talked about the growth of the state, and more and more we're taxed, and this is one of the subjects we wanted to get onto. Is I think it's I've read now, and I think from our own personal experience we can verify this, that taxation is arguably the largest expenditure families have. And that's just amazing that people don't realize that. If you ask them, okay, what's your biggest expense? They may say, my groceries or my gas or my, even mortgage, rent. But the fact is, if you sit down and think about it, and you look at your actual paycheck, how much comes out, and that's just your income tax, and you talk your sales tax and your property tax and your payroll taxes, and it is your largest expense. And then you wonder, okay, I'm paying all this money. As they say, tax freedom day still doesn't come until June or July. It's just incredible. And then you see where's the services? What am I getting for it? Why are we still running up deficits and debt? It's just mind-boggling to me, right? Yeah. And you see the growth of the state, and you're right, it's going to these programs, these agencies where even if the intention is good, it doesn't actually help the people you're trying to help. And because it gets swallowed up by the bureaucracy and inefficiency and just waste, quite frankly. And so there's just got to be a better way. And I've said for a while now, and I feel it's not so much a revenue problem here in Canada. It's a spending binge that we seem to have each and every year. And a lot of it has to do with trying to appease different groups or trying to be politically correct. And it's just, again, I believe in government by the people, for the people, and I just have not seen that for quite a while now. And again, that's what prompted me to get involved with Maxime Bernier and the People's Party, because again, I think we need to get onto a proper course. And if we continue on the road we're on, it's I fear for this country, quite frankly.
Yeah, actually, I'll go even further for you, because I'm not shy to say taxation is theft, or some people like to use extortion. But that's, once again, it's an area that some people get disturbed by that. But that's just the reality. And if you're going to break anyone out of their current paradigm, the only thing that's going to do that is if you give them that shock and kind of response. So, because immediately their first reaction will be, oh no, it's the price of what it is. But if there's someone that's at least inquisitive in any form or any fashion, and they actually sit down and think about it properly, is you never signed any social contract. It's all based on, once again, mystical concepts. But what it is, they rely on the benevolence of the typical individual, such as you or I, because most of us, I believe, at the end of the day, as long as we can get through our daily lives, sustain ourselves, keep a roof over our head, keep food in our belly, a lot of us will put up with a tremendous amount as far as that forced wealth and income redistribution. I mean, for the typical Canadian today, as you were alluding to, I mean, the Fraser Institute put it at roughly around 44, 46% now. So basically half of our income is distributed through, like I say, the state, and you have no idea to even know where it's going to. You don't know who are the benefactors or the recipients of that wealth redistribution effort. Whereas if you were the person, if you had that, 40+%, and I'm a person that I've said this in many times in the past, I don't believe in the socialized healthcare system, but I will say this. If someone wanted to create like an insurance type thing where you do voluntarily opt into a 10%, I'd gladly contribute 10% of my income, whether I never used the services ever, just to give people some underlying social safety net as far as if they're going through really, really difficult, hard times. And I think most Canadians would, which is why these quasi-socialist states flourish and actually exist in Western capitalist democracies, because most people, I think, are at least benevolent enough that they're willing to sacrifice some of their own productive wealth and labor to help others. Otherwise, you would see violent revolutions. So we must already recognize that if you don't see violent revolutions, and we're taxed, like I say, to the tune of half of our incomes, even just the average Canadian. So that should tell you that most Canadians are benevolent enough to be more than willing to offer that up. But once again, why do we have to use these archaic institutions that are, 18th, 19th century behemoths that we don't need today? Like, we have so many areas, and like I say, through blockchain technology and smart contracts and voluntary interactions, crowdfunding. I mean, there's a million or a myriad of ways that people can help others that are in definite need. And if you do it properly, at least you can see that cause and effect correlation. Like if I'm handing someone money myself directly, I know who the recipient is because I've actually done that. And I same with blockchain or smart technology or smart contracts. I can make sure that the help is going where it actually needs to be. But even when you're talking about that, here's something I like to tell people when you're talking about taxation. because I think you have to kind of hammer down, right down deep into this stuff to get people to think, to get their psychology on board and to thinking what this actually represents. So if we go back, like I say, whether it's the slaves of the South down in the U.S., or whether you're talking, even if you go up, when the U.S. was just first starting getting founded in the 18th century or so, and the early 19th century, a lot of Irish people even were slaves back in the day, or indentured servants, or indentured servants that come from old world Europe, right? But even if you consider now, whether it's the slaves on the plantations or some of the Irish slaves in the northern, northeast capitals and such, is you still always had to have each one of them. So I'll use a slave on a plantation down the south as a perfect example. So maybe they weren't compensated with actual monetary compensation, but they were always given, you had to make sure there was a roof over the person's head. You had to make sure there was food in their belly. Slaves no good without food in the belly, right? They're not going to be able to pick much cotton if you're not feeding them. And you had to make sure that they had clothes on their back so they didn't freeze or, succumb to some of the harsh conditions. So if you take what it costs, the roof over your head, the food in your mouth, and the clothes on your back, even today, imagine what that costs for you as just the average taxpayer in this country. Strip that out from that, like I say, that 46%. Right. How are we today? How far removed are we from true slavery? What, by 10, 20%? Mathematically, that's all what I see today is it's just the central planners realize that it's very, very difficult to control people just based on the whip. But if you can control them through the mind, well, it's much more efficient. Actually, and tell you the truth, it's that horizontal enforcement where the slaves will actually battle each other, right? So this is what I see even today. It's like we're fighting each other over the crumbs while the masters or the central planners are making out like bandits. Like, to me, everyone's got to stop focus on this group identity bullshit or pitting slaves against slaves and just focus on those who are actually the ones that are truly enslaving us, not just economically, but socially as well.
That's part of the problem. Like you said, we're conditioned almost from birth, quite frankly, right? To accept the authority of the state, to go along just to get along, and to accept this is the way things need to be. Well, in my view, if you do any kind of critical thinking, you realize, no, it doesn't need to be like this. You can make a change, and at the very least question, why is it like this? We don't even question these days, right? So, like I said, when people stop to realize that they pay so much taxes, even when they do, even when their eyes do open that they pay so much taxes, they just shrug their shoulders and they say, "Oh, that's just the way it is. What can I do about it?" Well, there are things you can do, and people respond to incentives. And like I said, I've seen people who, because they don't make much money, and when they see how much is taken off for taxes, they say, what the heck? Well, why am I even working? And they go on welfare, or they go on or receive some kind of government assistance because there is no incentive. People aren't stupid; they do react to incentives. So again, we've made a system where you've got more and more government control, intrusion into our lives, and what really makes it problematic is that they are reducing the incentives for us to be productive members of society, right? So I've seen this erosion over the years, over the decades now, and like I said, we've got to do something about it. You have to get involved. You have to stand up and be heard, whether it's by getting involved politically, by having these types of conversations, getting on social media, and just trying to open eyes and change some hearts, quite frankly, because like I said, it's almost like we're in a numbed or zombie state. But with a lot of people I speak to, they don't even realize that this is the way things are, or worse, if they do realize, they don't think there's anything wrong with it, which is like, just again, it's an eye-opener to me. Brings back the analogy that I've heard when I was back in school about the boiling frog syndrome, right? You throw a frog into a boiling pot of water, it'll jump right out because it knows, it's getting burned. But you put it in cold water and you slowly over time raise that temperature, it doesn't even realize it's being burned and boiled to death. And I just feel that that's the way things are going in our country, is that slowly but surely you've got more and more government intrusion, intervention, and it's because it's happening slowly and in a methodical manner. We don't even realize that our rights and freedoms are being stripped from us, and we're basically just handing over the future of this country to our government leaders who don't necessarily have our best interests at heart.
Yeah, and you said the most important and operative word of this whole conversation, and I've said it many times myself, is incentive. Incentives. And it really comes down to, and like I say, whether when you were raised yourself by your parents or, I have my own sons, is you have to give people proper incentive structures and hope that they'll take advantage of that. There's never a guaranteed outcome, but at the very least, the best thing you can do is give people proper incentive structures. But what you're seeing today is the incentive structure has been completely upended and twisted to the point now where the incentive is to constantly create this, not just political division or identity politics, but constantly seeking to use that power, that representation of force of violence, which is what government is, as a means to an ultimate end. And that is the incentive that I see. It's going to be the ultimate, it'll be the culmination, and it'll be the ultimate destruction. But I hope this doesn't take place, because I've coined my own phrase that we're actually living today what I termed as the intellectual era 2.0. So we have not the Gutenberg press, we have the internet. And I'm hoping that, and because I believe humans have free will, I don't believe in determinism per se, I hope we can pivot away from this. But all the signs keep pointing that if we continue on this particular kind of incentive structure, which is, once again, to use force and violence as the ultimate mean to end, then the only people that you're actually catering or appealing to are those that are seeking power. And once you've created a structure that's not, like I say, not neutral or negative in manner, right? Like I say, so the basic tenets of a constitution of Western democracies is, like I say, neutral and negative rights, just respecting each other. But once you've created the era or the atmosphere where it's, like I say, it's that race to the who can pick up that gun and use it against everyone else, because they perceive everyone else is going to pick up that gun to use against them. Well, that's that race to well, not just the lowest common denominator, but a complete destruction and breakdown of the societal norms that has literally built the West and all the prosperity and all the things. That's the other thing. I mean, like you recognize, I recognize, there's a reason why people of all areas and backgrounds love coming to like Canada, the US, is because they are afforded that opportunity. They're supposed to be coming here with that negative or neutral aspect of our rights and freedoms. Is I'm at least going to be given the chance. But now, as you see, now what's happening? Now you got, Sikhs, Christians, Muslims, everybody, or gays, straights. Now, when you play the identity politics thing, and like I say, you create about positive rights where it's forced wealth, income redistribution, or forcing your ideology or your social norms onto people. Well, now everyone's scrambling to pick up that gun to use against each other. And that's a terrible, like I say, whether it's in your family setting, a community setting, or a societal setting, that's a terrible, well, you're not going to have peace and harmony when everyone's going to be looking to pick up the gun to impose their wills or their mandates on other people, just based on the sheer fact that now they perceive that people are using the political process for the wrong reasons. And people are. And we've seen this. I've seen this myself for decades. People have constantly voted in more and more growth in government and the forced redistributive aspect of the state. And like I say, now everyone's got to the point where nobody's even willing to help each other out. And the reason why that is, a lot of them just even understand naturally or instinctively that, hey, the government's already plundering half my wealth. I'm not going to help anybody else. I'm already forced to help other people. So now you don't even have the proper incentives to help, to have communities of people that are willing to help each other. Why? Because they actually understand intrinsically, I'm already helping a lot of people out that I haven't even chosen to. So it, like I say, it comes down to, once again, the incentive structure, and the incentive structure is detrimental to the flourishing of people, and not just people based on their economic norms, but their social norms as well. Because once again, as I come from a Christian family, but I would never seek to impose Christianity or my beliefs or some of the things that I hold dear to my heart onto other people. I would expect that other people want to do things their own way, and it might be more conducive for them. I don't, like I say, I'm humble enough to know that I don't know what's best for other people. So to me, it should be just about respecting each other's sovereignty, our individuality, and at least, like I say, just like if we were sitting down, I use this example so many times because I think it's another example where people can visualize it and picture is if we were to sit down and play a board game, which is basically in a societal structure, we're sitting down and if you're talking about economic or social interactions, the only way that's going to work out is if everybody has to follow and align by the same rules. The minute somebody has the ability to escape those rules, well, that's the person that's going to not only win the game every time, but they're going to be able to make everyone, they'll be able to, once again, pick other people that they'll be able to bring along with them to be the perceived winners and force everyone else to be the perceived losers. The only way we're going to want to do that properly is if everyone has that equal opportunity and has to play by the same rules. But those who represent government today, because government is no longer just a representation of negative or neutral rights, now you have people, once again, that are racing to pick up that gun to use against everyone else because they perceive if they sit on the sidelines, well, someone else is going to pick it up and use it against them. And you know what? That's a truthful statement. So people are doing things that I think it's wrong for them to be doing that, to be using that state against other people. But once again, they're just people that are confused and confounded and using that as a means or a mechanism for defense. In reality, the best thing we can break them free from that is to talk about the things that we're talking about today. So they're not perceiving people or groups as their opponents or their adversaries, but people that are fellow travelers. That's how I want Canadians to think of each other is, you know, you might want to take a different path. You might want to take a different exit than I do someday, but we're all traveling in the same direction, which is to respect individual rights, freedoms, and liberty.
And you're talking about, but who's fomenting this division, right? I think it's astounding to me. It's our own government, quite frankly. I mean, like I said, they're the ones playing identity politics. They're the ones who are, bowing at the altar of political correctness. They're the ones who are telling different groups that you need help and you're a victim and you need to be supported. And and it's just stunning to me. And and more, and it's almost like we're conditioning our society. Particularly through our schools and the media and so forth, that you are a victim, and we need even more government intervention. And you see now, particularly on the left side of the spectrum, or in the States, the so-called progressives are actually openly advocating for socialism. And it's like, I think we're basically the same generation where we saw what socialism has done around the world. We grew up in the Cold War. This is exactly what we fought against, right? And I still remember the Berlin Wall coming down and how everyone was rejoicing, including those who were living in the Eastern Communist bloc. They fought and wanted freedom. They wanted liberty. They wanted their rights. And now it's almost like the pendulum swinging back towards that. And people are saying, no, we want more government intervention. We want the state to have more power and have more of the control the means of production. And it really is astounding to me. It's like these people haven't learned from history or don't know what's going on even in the world right now. And
yeah. Well, I mean, power, and I mean, everyone understands this if you talk to them as an individual, that power has a corrupting nature because they probably experienced it in their own personal lives in some form or fashion. But this is what it seems to happen today is it's not that people, I don't think people actually forget that. It's just that it depends on the particular actors that have gained that perception of power, that they choose to be willfully blind or ignorant to that reality because they're, once again, once you've achieved and maintained that position of power or authority, it's very difficult at that point to try to wrestle that power away from them, which is why the founding fathers of the U.S., why they were so wise and had such forethought back in the day to restrict and limit the potential. Although even today, like you see the misconstruing of even the very simple language contained within the document is now you have legalese and politicians or lawyers that are misconstrued to the point where it just means whatever they want it to mean. But the founding fathers knew very well, because they understood the monarchs of Europe and how authoritarian they could be, is you have to greatly reduce in size and scope any pretense of authority by any central planning government or state. And like I say, I'm not even a fan of the state or government. I'm hoping at some point in time humans will overcome that belief in statism, just like we overcome the belief in just blind conformity to a mystical God, right? Or something where we just have to allow a lot of things to happen under the pretense, well, God deemed it so, right? So I'm hoping that humans at some point in time, hopefully in the 21st century, if the information age continues to flourish, that we'll actually get past the belief in state and get more to, like I say, treating each other, advancing the intellectual areas, so that we actually acknowledge each other as individuals rather than preconceived notions of states. I'd actually like to see, rather than going globalist as far as some of the people that want to enslave the entire globe, I want to recognize that there's not just, a couple hundred states on the world. I want to recognize that there are 7+ billion individuals in this world. And when, like I say, the globalists want to take us to a conformity and deny the individual, whereas proponents of true liberty, if you truly care about people's rights, and especially if you're talking about the minority, then you have to break that all the way down to the individual. So what I want is, I want to see 7+ billion individual sovereign states, which is a representation and a respect of each and every one of us. Then we can, I think at that point in time, the sky, the universe is it is the limit at that point in time, but we still have to break through some of these paradigms. But because dogma and religion is so entrenched in their psychology, not to mention tribalism, because, historically, we all were predisposed to caring about the tribe. It was the only way that we would have thrived as a species, right? Just like in the animal kingdom for the most part. But like I say, we're so much more advanced than just, the rest of the animal kingdom. I hope that we will get to that point. I believe, actually, I'm positive enough that I think we will get that point. But I'm also pessimistic enough to understand that I think the only time you ever get to that is you do have to go through some kind of protracted time frame where people got to go through some hardship, because that's another thing too. I understand human psychology enough that it's easy to tell people, like, you just should do the right thing. But some people might not take your advice. And most of the times, those kind of people, the only way they will actually start pivoting towards doing things properly is if the proper incentive structure there. And like I say, that incentive structure means that those people that are doing the wrong things have to suffer in some way, because that's the only thing that's going to change or affect their habits of behavior, is if they're suffering doing the wrong things. But today, the incentive structure has been so completely destroyed and upended that now the people that are doing the wrong things are being greatly rewarded, and the people that are trying to do the right things are being punished. So I don't know. Like I say, I'm not an oracle. I don't pretend to know how this is going to unfold, but it seems like we may have to go through some even more difficult times than we're experiencing now before things get better at some point in time in the future. What do you think?
I wouldn't be surprised at that. Like, it's, there's usually a period of prosperity, and almost like the Renaissance is preceded by the Dark Ages, right? So you have to go maybe through that difficulty, that upheaval, before you come out through the other side of the tunnel. So we may very well have to go that route. I'm hoping we don't. And like I said, I'm hoping we can get us back on course properly, and return us to a time where we actually respected each other, and we were free to do what we wanted to do, quite frankly, and to prosper on our own merits, and to eventually make something of our own personal lives, rather than have the state involved to give us almost like that safety net. I'm not saying that there isn't a role for the state. I'm not saying that. I'm just saying that the role of the state has gotten so enlarged now that it's unproductive and or at least counterproductive, quite frankly. And we've got to reverse course and give people again their liberties and their freedoms and their rights back, quite frankly. So, and ultimately, a country, in my view, can't really prosper unless you have those basic values and those basic ideals of liberty and freedom and respect. And again, as I see that being eroded, I see the prosperity of this country also being impacted adversely. So again, it's everything's intertwined. Everything has a cause and effect relationship. So unless we start dealing with the root cause, which again is, like I said, the foundation of liberty, respect, and freedom, I think you may very well be right. We may be eventually, sooner rather than later, entering into a bit of a dark period before the light shines at the end of the tunnel.
Right on. Another thing, actually, you had mentioned you wanted to talk about too, which two of them actually ties in here, is corporate welfare and cronyism. And that's an area that I see as another issue, especially for the entrepreneurial types in this country, which, well, it doesn't matter if you're in this country or any other country, but for an entrepreneur to want to step up the plate and be creative, innovative, and feel that they're going to have any amount of success or achieve any amount of success in that endeavor, they have to know instinctively that the system isn't rigged, right? Because that's, you're sending a guy out on a sprint and tying his feet together. Well, chances are the guy's probably not going to even want to step up to the starting line because you recognize that, yeah, I'm already hampered and hindered to even try to venture into this competitive race or this competitive venture. And that's what I see today is corporate welfare is so much destroying people's willingness. I think today, if we had actual genuine free market economy, that the telecommunication companies in this country would be sweating bullets. As a matter of fact, you would see a lot of industries, but I'll just stick with the telecommunication industry in particular because it's so monopolized in this country. And because we live in the age of information and where there is so much competition, that could actually, enter in here and cause Canadians to have so many, even rural Canadians. I'm surprised after all this time that they're not even, I remember like the people at Facebook and some of the execs, I think it was Eric Schmidt from Google had mentioned, they had even talked about using the higher Earth orbiting type of satellites. I think they said they need about 28 or so, but where you wouldn't even have to worry about rural infrastructure as far as internet connections because you wouldn't need ground-based infrastructure. It would all be done through the satellites in space. Minute structures as far as ground-based structure, but most of it would be done. And because of how it works as far as those orbiting satellites high enough on Earth. Well, actually, you need the lower ones for higher amounts of broadband, but because these technologies get so much better on a continual basis. I'm surprised here in 2019, and we're getting close enough. Actually, half a year, a little more than half a year away, it would be going into 2020. I'm surprised that we're not seeing this. Well, not surprised. I mean, I know that the innovation, I know the creativity is there, I know the entrepreneurial zeal and spirit is there. The problem is the barriers and the obstacles they need to try to create these structures to compete against the monopolies that exist today. And like I say, even people in some of the rural communities of our country, such as Canada, I'll use the East Coast where I'm from as an example, is there are a lot of people that would like to live back there so they could take care of their aging parents or grandparents, but because there's no good internet infrastructure, and the speeds are so low, you couldn't even do any, like even if you wanted to create an online kind of like a store, like I know a lot of women, like even my wife, like things such as Etsy where you can do online sales and stuff. It's so much more difficult to do that because you don't have the proper kind of infrastructure. And once again, that would be an easy thing where it would be less hindrance on the healthcare system if people were actually back the East Coast, because those areas such as New Brunswick has a very, very aging demographic. A lot of old people, as far as, well, it's almost turned into Florida. It's like nothing but old people and their parents, right? But what would happen is a lot of people that had to go to different parts of Canada to work, they could be back living there, helping to take care, like I say, their aging parents or grandparents, which would alleviate a lot of the healthcare system, because a lot of times they show up or go to these doctors just, maybe because they're bored or because a lot of times that stuff could be dealt with without having to be so cumbersome towards our healthcare and a lot of other infrastructure systems that or entitlements in this country. But once again, all the incentives have been destroyed. So now you have entire areas of the country where everyone's congregating to these large urban centers, such as like where you are and where like Toronto or like Vancouver or Montreal, which once again just creates this ramp up and escalations of price increases as far as housing. You got, congestion, and the infrastructure not taking place. Like I say, if you had some proper incentives as far as market fundamentals and didn't have corporate welfare that were giving these behemoths or the established players so much of an advantage, I think a lot of the problems and the issues that we're seeing today that are economic in scope and even actually social in scope, a lot of these issues would cease to exist if we had genuine competition in the marketplace. And like I say, whether that's in telecom or in healthcare, because that's another thing too with healthcare. Let me just say this, and then I'll give you a chance to respond here, is even when you're talking about healthcare, people say, oh, we don't want private healthcare in Canada. Well, what about all the rich Canadians that have lots of money that can pay for private healthcare? You might think that, oh, I don't want someone to have a better opportunity than I do as far as healthcare. But what you're not thinking, if you're one of those people, is the flip side of that. Is if these wealthy people that can actually afford to pay from their own pocket for healthcare, well, that means there's a whole lot area of the healthcare system that's now better for the people that can't afford it. So even the public healthcare system would benefit if the people that were wealthy and could pay for a private system, if they were congregating to the private system, there would be much more resources left for people that actually require or need the public system.
Certainly. So let's go back first. So you were talking about corporate welfare. And again, whenever you have government interfere in the marketplace, you're going to have perverse consequences. That's just the long and short of it. And you've seen it time and time again, where governments, on the pretense of saving jobs or it's in the national interest, protects different sectors or give bailouts and handouts to different companies. And of course, it's done at the expense, right? It's done at the expense of smaller businesses. It's done at the expense of other competitive forces. And therefore, again, it's just creating a perverse incentive in the marketplace. And it even goes beyond that. I think corporate welfare is one of those issues that I think both on those on the right and the left really come together on and have some common ground, because again, they just feel that it's wrong on so many levels. So again, why are you giving these big behemoths, the GMs, Chryslers, the Bombardiers of the world, these handouts and assistance when they've mismanaged or have risen and fallen on their own 2 feet? I mean, if you've got a family member who has a small business, is the government going to ride to their assistance if they're having trouble making payroll, or they're having difficulty getting a loan? Of course not. So you're not doing it for the small guy, the regular folks, the small businesses of this country, but you got no problem handing out big funds to these large corporations and large entities who really don't need it, or if they do, it's because of their own, like I said, incompetence, quite frankly, and their own mismanagement. So again, that corporate welfare is again another issue that is a real concern and of genuine interest to me. And it's been like this again for decades. Whether it's liberals, conservatives, whoever, they all step up to help these corporations again because they're beholden to big business and they do their bidding. And again, who pays the price? Whose tax dollars are paying for these bailouts? Right? It's you and I. I mean, there was just the other day, there was in the paper how an individual or an entity had a write-off of $130+ million. I mean, that's unbelievable. And yet they've got no problem taxing me and you and taking 40% plus of our paycheck, but letting these folks off the hook or giving them incentives and handouts to carry on as if it's business as usual. And again, there's no incentive for them to change or to improve because they know they can always come with cap in hand to government. So again, that's corporate welfare. And then you talked about again, protective industries. Perfect example, as you said, was the telecommunications industry and who suffers because of a closed system that we have in a protected system. It's you and I and the regular folks. We pay some of the highest cellular rates in the world. And that's been shown time and time again. And even when you try and open it up, again, they go to the CRTC or they go to government looking for protection, and they say, oh, jobs are at stake or it's the national interest, when we know that that's just isn't the case. And we'd all be much better off served with open competition and lower prices and more innovation as a result. But again, our governments don't listen to us and do not do what's in the best interest of regular Canadians. And just the final point you made there about healthcare. So again, it's like the old saying: if it's the definition of insanity to do the same thing over and over again and expect different results. So you already know that our healthcare system is under tremendous strain. We throw more and more money at it. Things don't improve. We've got some of the longest wait times in the world. So, like, what is your solution? And again, there is no solution except to throw more and more money at it. And of course, as I said, that's the definition of insanity. We've tried that and it hasn't done a darn thing for us. So again, you look across the world and you see better, and you can learn from them. You see in France, Germany, Australia, Japan, they have these mixed systems where, again, everyone's covered by and large. You have healthcare for all, but you have private delivery, which is helping to keep down costs, helping to spur innovation, helping to get those wait times down to not only manageable levels, but in an efficient manner where you can more often than not go and see a specialist within a week. Can you imagine here in Canada seeing a specialist within a week? Are you kidding? You'll be lucky if you get it within 4 months. And this is if you're in dire need. So my point is, if it's not working, let's do something about it. And if what we've done in the past hasn't served us well, then let's look at the new solutions and be open new approaches to these problems.
Yeah, and that's another thing. I'll even add, because in my family, on my mother's side, I have a dietitian, a doctor, and 2 nurses. And I would even say, if we had even a private system, whether it's not necessarily, because like I say, I don't think Canadians are ready to get away from having some kind of socialized healthcare system, nor do I think that it actually has to cease to exist. It just has to get to a voluntary, opt-in kind of thing. That's, I think, the best case scenario, because I think most people, or at least enough people in Canada, would be more than willing to sustain some kind of public healthcare system. But if you had, like I said, some kind of competitive modeling, or it wasn't a one-size-fits-all approach, then people, like I say, some of my own family members, I think, would be even much more greatly rewarded for their hard work and effort, because they would be, that's what I've noticed in every institution, whether it's public or private. So unionized systems, private or government type of monopolized systems, is there is that constant erosion of competence and holding each other to a particular higher standard. It does seem to be a race to the lowest common denominator, especially when you treat people as far as their wage compensations and that kind of equality. Whereas if you don't reward people based on their merits and what they bring to the table, then people will just seem to fall in line with, what's this good, comfy middle ground, or this lower area where everybody seems to be going along fine, but people aren't really putting their best foot forward, right? Stepping up their efforts in a manner that would be conducive to a proper functioning healthcare system. So I think, like I say, even those that are actually part and parcel of the healthcare field, like I say, whether it's doctors or nurses or even people in some of the long-term care facilities, if you give people the ability to be rewarded and compensated based on their merit and what they actually bring to the table, and what they bring as far as how much they benefit their patients, then that is something I think would be beneficial to everyone, because then you get people, once again, we're back to the same thing, is the incentive structure. So that really, at the end of the day, comes to me. And I just want to say one thing before I move forward, though, is because a lot of people get confused as far as libertarians when you talk about taxes and stuff. Is I actually don't want to see wealthy people taxed. As long as a wealthy person or a rich person achieve their success and achieve their wealth through offering a product or service that people, gravitate to and reward them and compensate them for such, then I'm all on board with that. But because I recognize this is an area where I like to offer some clarity of thought, is I do recognize that the average Canadians are taxed, and we don't have the ability to stash our money in these offshore accounts or tax havens. So I will say, as much as I'm not a fan of taxing the wealthy or the rich, what I will say is I believe in equality properly. So if we're going to tax people to pay for these socialist systems that we have today, then that has to come from, and I'm not saying that you need to do it on a progressive scale based on, if you're rich, you should penalize them more because they're wealthier. I'm just saying, at least make it so that we all have equality. So this is the thing to me. It actually could be real simple if you just said, for every Canadian life, we know that the healthcare system, well, proper functioning healthcare system, but that's the thing, you would need a free market to actually come to terms with that, would even represent. But let's say we could figure that out in any way or shape or form. Is, let's say it requires 7% of people's income to pay or sustain that, then, like I say, give people the option to opt in it. And because that's the thing, if you feel like you've got skin in the game and you've made that choice autonomously, then you will actually try to hold those people to account. But if it's someone that's just forcefully taken from your income before you've even seen it, like, it's just, once again, incentive, right?
No, and then it really does come down to that, right? I mean, even when you have universal healthcare, and I'm not advocating against that, but again, there are always consequences to the approach that you take. So you have universal healthcare, that's great, we're all covered, sounds great in theory, but again, what's the incentive then to look after your health? What's the incentive to not go to the hospital for every little thing that you have? I mean,
great points.
And these are all. And that's putting a further strain on our healthcare system, which adds to the wait times, which adds to the costs. So I'm saying, again, there are always implications for any decision you make. So so I'm saying let's at least reform the system, because I think there's agreement now that by and large it's not working as well as it could. at the very least. So let's at least try new and innovative approaches. And quite frankly, like I said, these have been tried in other advanced countries with a fair deal of success, where you can still have universal healthcare, but again, you've got some type of private involvement and delivery. And and quite frankly, and people don't realize this until you point it out to them, that you already have, even to this day, you have some private delivery in our healthcare system. Like, I mean, if I go to my physiotherapist is someone who is a private operator. If I go for a lab test, that's done by a private entity. I go and get my pills or any medication from a private pharmacist. So we do have private delivery. It's just like, why can't we now extend that more into actual, primary healthcare that people seem to be very agitated about and anxious about that very possibility, although it's done and has been done for decades in other countries quite successfully. So again, I think we need to take those steps, at least have that conversation, and then at least give it some thought instead of being closed-minded and say no, we that's privatization, that's off the books. That can't happen. Again, let's have that conversation, because again, it's not working for regular Canadians.
Well said, Peter. Yeah, this is actually, I'm really enjoying this conversation. You're a smart guy, and you seem to have a good head on your shoulders as far as understanding all these things. That's why I love doing these videos, is because all I need to know is that there are good Canadians like yourself out there that are thinking about these issues, and it gives me the kind of inspiration and boldness to continue doing what I'm doing. Because if you just listen to those in the media, you would think that most Canadians are just the dumbest fucking people on the planet, that are just, I don't know, conformists and not even thinking about these things. But that's the narrative that they want to send to keep people, stuck in that narrow confines, is what their allowable thought and their opinions. But I like I say, I like to have conversations with people from all across this country and talk about these things, because if other people, not just myself, I mean, it's good for me to even learn, but even anyone that's watching this video now, they'll realize that, no, see, it doesn't matter what the media hacks say or the politicians. If you just talk to Canadians out there, because that's another thing, a lot of Canadians have closed themselves off because they're scared to talk to others, right? To me, I said, I don't want that. As a matter of fact, I invite, even if you're a socialist or a communist, a matter of fact, I'm not going to hate on you. I just want to try to explain how there's some areas in your thought that's, it's just not, the cause and effect correlation that you've been taught is wrong. I just want to help correct some of the preconceived notions in your mind. It's not that I'm trying to tell people that you should be bad for wanting to help out your fellow man or woman or child. I want to do that too. But once again, I want the proper incentive structure to be in place that's going to be conducive for us all. I'm not saying that it's ever going to be perfect. No system ever is going to be perfected to the point where everybody's going to be well taken care of and never have any grievance for anything in their life. That's not going to happen. That's what it is to be a human being. Today is you have to deal with, there's positive and negative aspects of what it is to go through an entire life, right? That's just reality. But the best thing we can do is like I say, create an era or an area or an atmosphere where it's conducive for flourishment as far as human cooperation and competition. Because that's another thing. Even though I'm a libertarian, and I do love competition, there's also areas that you don't need competition. Cooperation matters too. But once again, the only thing that matters to me is, at the end of the day, are there areas of competition or cooperation? Are we doing things first based on voluntary interactions? And are we starting at least giving people or affording them the opportunity for everyone to participate? Because if we're restricting or eliminating anyone's ability to participate, well, you're going to have grievances that's going to arise. And if you're restricting anyone's areas to be competitive, then you're restricting people. So whether it's through cooperative efforts or competitive efforts, all I really care about at the end of the day is if everyone's given at least some form of equalities in terms of opportunity as far as participation. I don't ever expect there's going to be a result that's going to give true, genuine benefit, and we'll see, oh, look, now everybody's got 100% equality. That's not ever going to happen. As a matter of fact, those who actually promote that stuff are the true utopians. It's not libertarians. Actually, a libertarian that thinks about things properly and from the philosophical or psychological sense is like what you were alluding to earlier, is I just recognize that how human beings actually function. I'm not trying to, that's the thing. Actually, libertarians aren't utopian. We actually believe that humans are going to do things wrong. Sometimes it's going to be good. Sometimes it's going to be bad. There's all kinds of areas. So the only thing that matters most is give the ability for everyone to have at least the maximum amount of freedom, and that's going to give them the ability to challenge or counteract the ones that are more malevolent in nature. And that's another thing. Even people that have malevolent intention doesn't mean they're going to be malevolent in every area or aspect in their life. So like I say, competition or cooperation is going to benefit every one of us as long as we have the ability to interact voluntarily. Yeah. Now, there's one last thing I know you want to cover too, and if you want to even cover anything else subsequent to this, but I did want to make sure we covered all the areas that you were mentioning in your message is climate change, because that's obviously another thing that's playing on the mind of Canadians these days.
Definitely. So yeah. So again,
or actually, sorry, Peter, if you actually wanted to even before you go on to the climate change, if there was anything you actually wanted to reference as far as what I said or anything that you wanted to follow up on prior to that, go right ahead. Like I say, I'm not trying to move you off too quick there.
Yeah, I did want to segue from what you were saying and just leverage the point that you were saying about the conversation, how you're open to having this dialogue with anyone and everyone. And that's why, I think you're doing a great service for Canadians by opening yourself up to have these kinds of conversations, because that's how we learn. And like I said, I'm not looking to impose my views, my values on anybody. Quite the opposite. I'm actually looking to learn from others. So that's how I can refine and sharpen my own thinking and progress as a human being, quite frankly. So, and that really speaks to the crux of the matter. Another issue I wanted to touch upon was, again, freedom of speech. If you don't have that basis, that foundation in which to speak freely, and like you said, a lot of people today are very afraid. There's almost a chill in the air. People are afraid to speak what's actually on their mind. So if you can't be truly open and speak what you truly feel and how you actually think, how are we going to progress? How are we going to move forward? It doesn't make any sense to me. And again, where I just see so much partisanship in which people are shouting people down or just being, whether it be name calling or just, trying to shout people down and keep them suppressed from expressing their views. And how is that helpful? How is that going to, if anything, you shut them down and you're just going to create even a greater divide, right? These sentiments aren't going to go away. They're going to simply be pushed underground. And you talk about how people, you see demonstrations now with, for example, people speaking their minds, and they're shouted down by, a group like Antifa or whatever it may be. And how is that productive? How is that going to help the discourse in this country? Right? Let's talk. Let's use our words. Let's use our logic. Let's use our minds to have this conversation. And you change hearts and you change minds through dialogue, through speech, and by using logic and having them heard. Right? So that's how you do it. Right? So if you disagree with me, great. Let's have that conversation. Tell me why you disagree with me. Let's use logic and your arguments. And I'm open, and as long as I'm open and receptive to hearing them, maybe you either find a common ground, or maybe I even get converted to your way of thinking. That's the way it happens. But that's not going to happen unless there's an open dialogue in an environment that allows for people to speak freely. And again, I see more and more of this political correctness, this chill in the air that, well, you can't say this, you can't say that, you can't. Our thought leaders are trying to shape the narrative of what's acceptable behavior and thinking in this society, and I think that's authoritarian, and you've seen this in other countries, and that's how we devolve as a society, and so that's something I'm very concerned about, and I'm trying to combat and address in my own way.
Yeah, well, I mean, I just think of the expression. I mean, it's been reiterated many times for many people in the past, but the most recent example that kind of stuck in my mind was from Jordan Peterson. I remember he said in one of his lectures or something, more or less, without freedom of speech, what are your other options? Well, basically is conformity, right? Compliance and conformity, or violence. Because other than our ability to verbalize and vocalize, our disagreements and come to some form of agreement, and that can only happen, like I say, once again, you don't have to expand this out to full-on societal structures. Think about that even in your own family setting or family structure. It would be the exact same scenario in your own family structure. If you just choose to ignore each other or hate each other for everything that they stand for or the position they take, and you never discuss them with them, well, your only choice would either be to ignore each other completely and just allow each other to, once again, run to your perspective corners. But once again, that's just only create divide, or is to be violent, to have violent confrontation, to try to impose one side or the other. The only thing that's going to break us through or break us free from this is, yes, coming together. And actually, this is an area where I see a little bit of it, especially through the IDW, but it still seems to be predominantly mostly the same players that are want to function in this IDW. So they are diverse groups as far as their thoughts. So, you know, whether it's Sam Harris or Jordan Peterson or Richard Dawkins or many of these other figures or characters that are representation of the IDW that come from both the left or the right, or Ben Shapiro. But without people having the ability to come together to have dialogue, well, what good is anything? And actually, those ones that are even doing it, sorry, I got a little bit off my train of thought there, so I'm bringing it back around, is there's still people that are functioning. So they do have diversity of backgrounds, opinions, and all that stuff, and even their stances on particular issues. But it still seems to be predominantly the same key players and actors. I want to see this expanded, which is something that I've been trying, but I don't know how else to do it other than just keep making more videos saying that I don't want to even just talk with people that would be predominantly like in that center realm, right? That are, let's say, classical liberals, because that's what you're seeing predominantly today is so classical liberals, genuine conservatives, and libertarians predominantly that are all seemingly the ones that are the outliers today, and it's the fringe on the left or the right. So the collectivists, the ones that, although they come from both sides of the political aisle, but in reality their ideology is almost identical in scope. It's just who they pick or perceive as part of their collective or their group or their identity group. But I want to see this expanded so that there's people that are actually, and I'll just put this out here in this video even as well. Like I say, if you're a communist or a socialist or someone that even promotes fascism in any way, or any form of collectivism, or even anything that I haven't even brought up in this one, I want to have conversations so that not just for me, so I can learn where you're coming from as an individual, but it'll also help educate and inform other people that just want to know where are you coming from, because that's the thing to people today, especially the majority, the silent majority. They don't even predominantly, they know people, like they know where I'm coming from, because like I say, I put everything, I wear it out. It's all on my sleeve. I'm not leaving anything open to interpretation or that you got a question. I'll tell you exactly how I feel. But the left predominantly today, now there are the ones that would be perceived as the far left that are dominating the discourse and the narrative, but all those people that should be even somewhere along that political left in that spectrum somewhere, they're not even seemingly willing to step up and have conversations with, like I say, people like myself. So it causes this kind of confusion is, well, where are your loyalties? Are your loyalties to respecting individual rights or freedoms? Or are you just waiting to see which group, which identity group comes to power and you'll align with them? Because that's a form of cowardice that I think is detrimental. And especially if we can point that out with some kind of clarity, that I don't think most people would even want to align or conform with people that are cowards that aren't even willing to stand firmly on their convictions or their principles. And I think that's something I want to happen. And I'm like I say, I'm desperate. I'm hoping that I can get some of these people to engage in some kind of dialogue and conversation. And I think I've done enough videos and interviews today. I'm at least laying out the groundwork to show people that even if you disagree, now today we're having a very cordial conversation because we seem to agree on a lot, but even those that may very well disagree with me on some aspects in some areas, I will treat you with respect and dignity as an individual. That's what I do. Now, if you treat me like garbage, you're going to get back whatever you do to me, I'm going to give you back. But at the same time, I want to engage in dialogue with these collectivists because I think a lot of them are just coming from an area of ignorance. I don't actually believe a lot of people that predominantly come from, whether it's the left or even some of these alt-righters or these far-right people. I think a lot of them, and I've used some pretty negative connotations towards these people. I call them knuckle draggers. And someone pointed out to me that, that's probably not a good area to do it because that's not a good way to even start a conversation is to call someone a demeaning name. So I'll take that back. But what it does at least tell me, what I'm kind of alluding to is what it is you're showing that you're unwilling to actually think very deeply in these conversations, these issues. And if you're one of those people that are unwilling to like delve down deep into these critical issues, I mean, that's fine, but then don't be one of those people that want to vocalize shit there, right? Leave if you don't want to engage in genuine discourse or dialogue, okay, well then maybe don't try to be one of those dominant voices out there, because there are some of us that do want to engage in dialogue and conversation. And I don't want this divisive narrative to constantly keep restricting my access or my ability to talk with people that I think, like I say, are just more confused and confounded and ignorant to reality and facts because they've been indoctrinated into some form of religion or cult where they're not thinking critically about the issues.
Right, and that's again to your point. Again, we hear all the time, like from our political leaders and the media and our popular culture about diversity. Which is fine, but where's the diversity of thought? That I never seem to experience. And if you express a dissenting opinion or something that isn't part of the conventional narrative, then you're ostracized or drummed out of the tribe or whatever it may be, right? I mean, if anything, what I want to really celebrate is diversity of thought. Diversity of everything else is fine, like whether you're, like I said, whether you're a man or a woman or black, white, your religion, doesn't matter to me. Like, I want to hear your thoughts, and let's have that dialogue. Let's have that critical conversation. And like I said, I'm always open to having having my eyes open to new ways of thinking and to having that critical analysis that we often don't see because everything seems to be a superficial conversation. So let's sit down and delve into it like we're doing right now, and to explore. I'm an intellectual explorer. Let's put it that way.
Yeah, and if you're intellectually curious, it's pretty easy to figure that out in a short time frame just by having a conversation. Whereas I think a lot of the reason why these people that predominantly want to be the bullhorns of the left is they just want to repeat and regurgitate certain particular talking points, and they don't really want you to challenge them on it because, once again, that's not something that's conceived in their own mind. They didn't derive that thought all on their own. So, and I've noticed that, like I say, not just on the online realm, but even when I'm out working with the public, I recognize that people, and it goes back to even when I was a kid, don't discuss politics or religion. What it is they want to conform to a particular way of doing things and they don't want to think critically about any issues because it will disturb some of that indoctrination that's been jammed in their head, right? And it'll cause them to go through that cognitive dissonance moment. And most people don't like that. It's uncomfortable. But I mean, myself, I guess maybe a lot of us, that's maybe the reason. It could be another cause effect correlation, but I've gone through a lot of trials and tribulations over the course of my life. I come from, like I say, a very religious family and stuff. I've had to break through a lot of dogland in my past, whether it's some of the fundamentals of Christianity that weren't conducive with the proper teachings, that were just humans constructing their own narratives, or, like I say, the representation of the state. I've had to break through a lot of dogma over the course of my life and destroy a lot of my preconceived notions. And I'll admit, even myself right here now, it's not easy because everything that you built up for all those years or all those decades, and to have it wiped, it's like you're starting from scratch. It's like, I don't know where I am. I don't know where to. But you know what? That's not the end all be all, because, like I said, if you have an inquisitive mind, or if you're curious, or if you're a morally decent person and have any kind of foundation of ethics, which I think most people at least somewhat do, whether it's for their own internal selfish desires or reasons, or just because they have any pretense of benevolence or altruism. I mean, I think most of the time it's out of your own self-interest, but there may be some that just do it blindly out of pure benevolence. But like I say, at the end of the day, it's having the ability to have people that are willing to think on their own. Because I think if you're just someone that's going to repeat what you've heard as far as a political talking point, you're not going to want to interact or engage with someone that actually can think on the fly, right? You, obviously, you can. I can tell by having this conversation with you. Everything that you're saying is something that you are thinking of, and the thought processes are run through your mind, and it's coming in verbal speech. Right. Whereas if I was trying to engage with someone that only heard a couple political talking points, well, they'd be in pure awkward silence, hang up, try to tell me I'm an idiot or something, because what it is they don't have a proper constructive dialogue or narrative to offer as a rebuttal. So they get outraged and up in arms, and then, well, what the hell? That's not benefiting anybody.
That's not. And like I said, I've always felt that, as humans are thinking beings, right? And I just feel that part of the reason we were put on this earth was to think and to explore and to find out for ourselves, right? And I think you're doing yourself a great disservice if you're not exploring on your own and looking at other opportunities and other approaches and seeing whether there's any truth to that, right? I mean, I think we're all in search of the truth, but you can't find the truth if you're not open, and you can't be open if you're not willing to have that dialogue. So like you, I'm willing to speak and converse with anybody, and I'll always be respectful, and I'll always be open to what you have to say. And like I said, it might very well change my own ways of thinking, and I'll be grateful for that. Not only will I thank you for it, I'll carry that on with further conversations I have with others, right? So that's the way it should be. And like I said, unfortunately, I don't see that happening. And whether you're, like I said, I don't identify as right or left. Labels aren't for me. I'll just tell you what I think, what I feel. And if you want to convince me otherwise, all the power to you. I'm open to having that conversation. And in fact, I'll embrace whatever you have to say.
Right on, Peter. I like the way you think, man. Now, so did you want to move on to maybe the climate change area?
Yeah, let's talk about climate change. So, like I said, I was open to having a conversation to about any and all issues that affect regular Canadians, and I think this is a topical one. Here in Ontario, the carbon tax recently came into effect, and we're seeing the impact of that on prices for regular folks such as yourself and myself. And again, I try to have this conversation with people. Just to have a rational and respectful conversation. And it just seems to be, again, another issue that is so partisan. You've got people, say on the left, who say it's the most pressing issue and that we need carbon taxes and so on and so forth to fight climate change. And then you've got others on the right who don't even want to have the conversation, don't want to acknowledge that that there might be something to this. Again, I just want to keep an open mind. So again, coming from a rational and reasonable perspective, I have this conversation with people that, let's look at this, in a methodical manner. And at the end of the day, yes, I agree, climate is changing. I don't know anyone who doesn't feel that climate isn't changing. It's like anything else, everything in life changes. It is changing. So, and there might very well be global warming, and for argument's sake, let's say that it is caused by man and by putting carbon emissions into the atmosphere. But let's, again, looking at it rationally. At the end of the day, I'm thinking about Canada. Canada, at the end of the day, is responsible for, I think from the government's own website, is 1.6% of our global gases. So even if a carbon tax was successful in eliminating all our emissions, climate or global warming would still occur because it is a global phenomena and it needs a global solution. So even if there is man-made climate global warming and we're contributing to that, even if we eliminated our 1.6%, global warming is going to continue because of the emissions that are being spewed out by other countries, right? So how is it, rational, or even how does it make sense to put in a carbon tax that is only going to make you and I poorer? It's going to hurt regular folks in terms of, we already pay like you said 40% plus in taxes, and now you're dinging my wallet even more, and it's not going to accomplish anything, or at least the objective that you say it's going to accomplish. So again, when I try to have that conversation, particularly with those who are environmentally very proud or very involved, I just get I hit a roadblock. They just don't want to converse with me, and they don't want to look at the logic, and they don't want to deal with my arguments, right? They'll think of me as like, a climate denier or something like that. And I'm saying, no, I'm open to this. I'm acknowledging climate change. But how is your proposed solution going to address the issue? And they can never make that or answer that question. They can never make that connection. So again, it's something that I'm concerned about. Again, more and more, it seems to be that our governments are looking to hit us with taxes or these programs that just don't address the problem. Like I said, I'm even willing to admit, for argument's sake, that it is a problem and that there is global warming and it is caused by man. But again, if that's your proposed solution, tell me how it's going to address the issue. And no one has yet, to my mind, done that. So again, be reasonable and rational, it's just difficult to have that conversation with people, it seems.
Yeah, I actually think the most disturbing part of not just the climate change conversation, but a lot of our areas of actual conversation that should be taking place, the biggest issue, the biggest hurdle is to get over the crap that those in the established media or those that represent the political parties that have inundated. So you have to already get, just before you can have the conversation with just another Canadian, is you've already got that big gigantic obstacle and barrier that you've got to get over of all the shit that they've been taught by those in the established media that take a dominant political narrative and run with it, and then create an atmosphere or an area where there's so many Canadians that are actually, like I say, they're coming from an ideological perspective, and then you have to overcome that before you even get down to actually having the conversation. So I'm like you. I actually believe, of course, well, I mean, that's another thing too. I'm not a scientist as far as understanding everything as far as ecology or the environment. But I do understand that, yes, like the poles shift, the way the Earth travels around the sun, even, and we're on not only do we orbit and we spin, but we're also off axis the way the Earth spins too, right? So there might be even variances and variables involved that plays into that. That's, like I say, outside of human control. But I would acknowledge and expect that, yes, the fact that, since the Industrial Revolution come to exist, and for the last few hundred years, of course, we've been contributed to an increase of what you might perceive as pollutants in the air. I don't doubt that for a minute. Once again, I also am not one of those that wants to create the Earth, right? Something that's billions of years old, as what? A victim of us. Listen, I think the Earth, if humans get to the point where I'm not worried about the Earth, maybe humans, right? If we screw up the planet, the Earth will be okay. Us humans are the ones that are going to be. But I don't want to be alarmist in the approach. And even when I think about the ones that are actually the truly environmentalists, while I might agree with them that, yes, they do our best to create an environment that's like, I want a cleaner air. Who the fuck don't want cleaner air? I want less smog. But the thing is, what drives me nuts about these people that predominantly come from that left side of the spectrum seems, like I say, once again, predominantly, I think these people just are absence of economic understanding, right? That's people that I perceive being on the left side of the political spectrum have good social values for the most part, or at least they believe they do. And I think a lot of times they do, but they just seem to lack actual economic understanding and understand human value. Because that's another thing with economics is how it pertains to how humans and we value things. But to me, it's like, if you're a true environmentalist, well, if you've been alive even just a few decades on this planet, in this country, you understand that, there are beautiful, amazing human beings that are so creative, so innovative, that they'll just give them that opportunity. That's the beautiful thing about the market, is rather than like look at McKinnon and the Trudeau Liberals, it's a one-size-fits-all approach. Let's just make everything profoundly more expensive for all the Canadian taxpayers, and that'll somehow incentivize them to stop what putting gas in their car to go to work?
Yeah.
What, putting fucking heating oil in their fucking tank, or natural gas to heat? What, you're not going to affect that. That's just something they're not going to do. But once again, if you allow free market competition, people to be innovative and creative and come up with new ways. I mean, think about how many times, just the automotive sector alone has brought, I know myself, like my first car was a 1981 Le Mans. Okay. And this thing, if you've seen the pollution that came out of that car compared to, a 2018, 2019, whatever vehicle you buy, no matter what the manufacturer is wow. I mean, the difference between the pollutions is, and once again, it was just market, it was competition that created that. And some people say, well, no, government mandated. No, competition will always be the drivers, because if someone comes up with a better business model or a plan that will be enticing towards a particular demographic or particular people that are looking for that stuff, well, once again, that market fundamentals that will gravitate people to, I mean, perfect example, like things like Tesla and stuff. If you give people the option to have different actually have different options available or afforded to them, that some of them will adopt that. And I expect at some point in time in the future, whether it's through the forced means or whether it's just through voluntary adoption, I think we will eventually get away from using natural resources such as oil and gas, although it's not going to totally cease to exist, because once again, you need those, even some of those mining equipment, even just to get to those mines. Like, that's the thing that people don't understand how things actually function, is you need a lot of these heavy industrial machines that now currently function under natural gas or oil to even create. I seen a perfect pitch was this dude is hilarious because someone shared the video. Is a guy backed up with his Tesla, I think it was a Model S, to a big diesel generator charging us. But once again, like, how much are you benefit the environment by, you might have bought that Tesla, but once again, there was a lot of oil and natural gas and resources that were used just to even create that Tesla. But once again, if you allow free market competition, I know I'm getting a little bit off on what I was actually trying to say, is but if you allow free market competition rather than a one-size-fits-all approach, because that's what government mandates are, they're just using a one-size-fits-all approach. If you allow market fundamentals, innovation and creativity to take that center role or take center stage, I think we'll actually get to a point where we don't have to worry about that, and it'll be done in under proper market scenarios and situations that will be more conducive for a proper transition. Whereas right now, look at what they're doing right now. You're basically forcing Canadian, under the Trudeau Liberals, they're forcing the working poor in Canada, people that work in minimum wage retail jobs, to subsidize some rich dude to buy a 50, 60, 70, 80,000 or $100,000 plus electric vehicle. I mean, you can incentivize people in a certain manner, but you don't have to steal from the poor to subsidize the rich. That can play out properly as if you just allow market competition to exist.
No, and you're absolutely right. And, like I said, I believe government has its place, but I've never equated government with innovation, right? So progress comes through innovation, and innovation is always going to come from the private sector, quite frankly. So again, government has its place, set the rules in order, and make sure everyone's playing by the rules, so to speak, and give them the freedom to succeed or fail on their own. But again, that's how you progress through that innovation that's going to come from the private sector. And everything you look around us, everything that we benefit from today, whether it's be this internet, whether it be the computer, whether it be cell phones, or whether it be cars, it all came from the private sector. So the more regulations and disincentives you put in the way of companies, then the less innovation and less progress you're going to have. It's as simple as that, right? And again, you see other areas in the world where they're cutting the red tape and reducing regulations, and you see that they're thriving, right? I mean, again, I'm someone who studied history and in university and economics, so I have a basic understanding of both subjects. And you look at countries in Eastern Asia, like Singapore. It wasn't that long ago that they were literally a backwater, and how did they become such a rising economic power? And it's just basically a city island state with no resources, and they had good governance, good leadership, and they opened up their markets, and they said, for a free markets, and that's how they did it. And you see that played out over and over again throughout the world and in different countries. And you look at countries before who were more command and control and socialist countries, and they did not prosper. It's only when they started opening up their economies, whether it be China or India and so forth, did you see a reduction in poverty and prosperity, start to spread throughout the common people. So again, I think that's the kind of conversations we should at least have, and like I said, look to learn from both history and from our neighbors around the world, and see how can we improve as a society.
Yeah, well, when you're talking about freedom in regards to the market, it's just because people hear this terminology and they don't actually, a lot of them don't seem to actually understand what it means. All a free market is, because all of us, every one of us, you, Peter, and myself, every human being is just a representation of free market, because free market just represent free people. And free people, whether in any structure, no matter what it is, free people are much more innovative and creative than people that are enslaved in any form, right? Or restricted. So all proponents, especially myself, I can't speak for everyone, but for me as a proponent of free markets and freedom, all I care about is those, like I say, freedom. If you allow freedom to flourish, that's going to be more beneficial. Actually, the environmentalists, if they were wise, if they weren't so dogmatic and ideologically driven and consumed with somehow taking over some mechanisms of power, they would be proponents of free market. Because, I mean, all you would do, look through history, and as you alluded to already, is a lot of the things that, or barriers or obstacles we thought were very difficult to ever overcome, have been overcome because of those people that had the freedom to be creative and innovate. And to me, if you're a true proponent of being an environmental steward and caring about the future of not just, Canada, but the entire globe, then your best mechanism going forward to allow that to actually happen in a manner that's conducive and beneficial, and not just innovative and creative, but also very much having a can't think of the word right now, in a short time frame. Anyways, you can make that happen much quicker. I just had the word on the top of my tongue. Totally skipped me there for some reason. But anyways, but you can make that happen in actually a much shorter time frame if you allow, like I say, for some genuine market competition, because you don't know. I mean, the federal Liberals picking, particular people to be the new stewards of the environment. You don't know if that's the person that has the greatest mind or the greatest concept or the greatest idea. No, but the market allows for that. The market's not going to know which one per se, but if you allow that market to be free, then that person that comes up with the best idea will have the ability afforded to them to implement that, and that'll be a benefit to us all. So to me, even if you're an environmentalist and is one of those people that are caring and pushing back against some of these, major corporations that aren't good economic or environmental stewards, well, once again, allow the free market to flourish, and you'll see that the bad actors will fail or falter as a consequence when a better business model is introduced.
Absolutely, and we've seen that over and over again throughout history, and we see that even today with the rise of social media. That's now being traditional or legacy media is now being eclipsed. I mean,
great example.
There's always progress. There's always a better mousetrap to be had, but again, that's going to come from human creativity and ingenuity, and that's only going to happen in the private sector, in the private market, when there's a free voluntary exchange of ideas and labor and capital. So that's what I'm trying to promote, and I'm trying to ensure that others are aware that that's just because it's been like that in the past doesn't necessarily mean it's going to continue, right? I mean, we have to continue to fight and stand up for our freedoms and our rights, because if you don't, they're going to continue to be eroded, and you won't even realize it, quite frankly, until it's too late.
Excellent, Peter. Well, like I say, I think we've pretty much covered most of those things. If there's anything else you would like to cover, I'm more than willing to do so. But I'm pretty happy with how this conversation been going. It's been a very fluid conversation, and I like your position, your stance on the issues, because it tells me once again that you're someone that's actually obviously caring and concerned just like myself, but you're willing to think about these issues critically. And like I say, at the end of the day, anyone that's watching these videos, what they'll take away from it is you don't need authoritarian central planners. If there's one thing I want people to take away from any of the videos or interviews I do, is you don't need these so-called experts to be the ones that dictate and control every area of your social or economic lives. Just allow, innovation and creativity by, millions and ultimately billions of individuals. Let that flourish. Let that take place. And of course, within the confines of, being respecting of each other's individual sovereignty, our inherent rights and freedoms. But if you allow that to take place, as Peter's alluded to, and what I'm suggesting is that will work out. That's much more beneficial and in a much shorter time frame than just placing this in the hands of these people that, they perceive of themselves, and they pump up how they're so benevolent and they have only the best intentions. But how many times through history have we seen where that road to hell by these benevolent overlords or central planners has been, that road to hell has been paved with bad or good intentions? So to me, I don't want to wait till the time comes where we got to learn and go through that experience of, we shouldn't allow these central planners to dominate the discourse or dominate the economic activities of the country. I don't want to wait for 20, 30 years or whatever and say, look, we should have never now we've got to go through another protracted period of time where people are going to suffer tremendously. Maybe many people will suffer and die as a consequence of allowing this to happen. What I want to do is at least tell people, place faith in your fellow man, place faith in freedom, place your faith in liberty and people's ability to get out from underneath of any imposition that's being placed upon them. If you place your faith in your fellow humanity rather than a unique or elite dominant group of players that, like I say, their whole goal in life is to centrally plan every aspect of your social and economic lives. Think about the incentive of people that are functioning in a free market, and think about the incentive of people that want to dominate you right? The people that want to function in a free market, those are the people that are going to be much more creative, are going to do things that are much more conducive to respecting your freedom and liberty than those who want to, like I say, micromanage and manipulate things. Because like I say, no one has that ability. And I don't even think we're ever going to get to the point where actually data is enough to allow some supercomputer to control and dominate. But we're not at that point now. Right now, there's still human beings that are trying to do that. And while that is placed in the hands of, like I say, a very finite or select group, well, that's not going to be conducive for everyone. That might be conducive for certain people in the economy. Like I said, they're the ones that get to pick the winners or losers, where the free market, free people, everybody will end up being winners. Well, in some form or some degree, or at the very least, they won't have other people imposing their will on them.
Exactly. And, it's you made the statement that I often use, again, that the road to hell is paved with good intentions, right? So I believe, like I said, ultimately people are good and have the best of intentions. The problem is again, when you try to impose your views and your understanding on things on others, and it just ends up more often than not very poorly. So again, what I would simply maybe close off the conversation was again to implore your viewers and their friends and family and others to just to think critically, to see where you can make a difference at the very least, come October to vote and to based on the platforms and the actions of the various political parties. Because again, as I stated earlier on in our conversation, this country is going to go one of two ways. It's going to go it's going to become what we make it or what we allow it to become. And I, for one, am not willing to just sit on the sidelines and let others make this country what they believe it should be. I want to have a say in what it becomes. And so that's why I've now decided to get politically involved. And I hope others at least open their minds and start to think critically about what's happening in this country.
Awesome, Peter. And since you are a PPC guy yourself, actually, maybe if you don't mind, I'd like to have another conversation with you at another point in time, and maybe we'll just talk about the PPC platform and maybe bring this into the political realm, because people will have to recognize that come this October, there is going to be a genuine, viable option out there. And the best thing that we can do at this point in time is, once again, just it's another area of competition, right? Politics is an area where I still don't place most of my faith in, but I would rather see the PPC have the opportunity to at least shift the political landscape to the point where we're actually getting back to respecting people and bringing unity to this country rather than division. And like I say, there's lots of areas and lots of tenets and principles that is contained within the PPC party platform that I think is very much conducive for those of us that do stand for individual rights, freedoms, liberty, respect, fairness, and all those things. And that's, like I say, a conversation we can have on another day, and hopefully you'll be willing to do so.
Oh, it absolutely would be. It's been a real pleasure to talk with you, CL. And honestly, I could have sat here and talked with you all day, but I know you're busy and there's other things to do. But I would certainly welcome a conversation about the PPC platform at a future date. So I very much look forward to that.
Yeah, actually, I'm just going to let you know here, because what it is the wife's starting work in about 10 minutes here, so I usually go give her a little smooch and stuff and all that before she heads off. I said I would try to tie it up within a couple hours. Otherwise, trust me, you'll find this out if we have another conversation. Is I can talk quite a bit myself.
That's great.
But yeah, thanks a lot, Peter, for having this great conversation. And like I say, I'll reach out to you, and we can, like I say, we'll do this again. We'll talk about the PPC party platform and delve a little bit deeper into that and see what we can do as far as enticing people to adopt, breaking out of that paradigm of that libcon, that the two wings of the same bird. Because really, that's how the only way we're going to get out from underneath of it is to pivot towards something that they're trying to do something different, or at least bring some semblance of politics that's conducive for us all and inclusive rather than divisive. And I think the PPC is doing that in spades. Even the name of the party is it's the People's Party, right? And that's, at the end of the day, we're all people, and really that's what matters most is to bring people together rather than use identity politics that further divides us.
Well said. So,
all right, Peter, you have yourself a great day, man. We'll talk to you soon.
Thank you so much, and I look forward to our next conversation.
All right.
All right.
Hey, Libertarian. I love liberty.